What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I want to cover Benjamin Percy's GhostRider because his run is a phenomenal return to form to like the old GhostRider stories from the 80s and 90s that were like hyper violent and like just the whole hell landscape and everything. It was really, really cool. So we're gonna do issue number 1. Let me know what you guys think, and if you guys like it, we'll cover the rest. So the thing about this is that Benjamin Percy borrows very heavily from the Century's origin story, but there are a couple things that we have to solidify here. So one of the things that Marvel had previously done is they had made Johnny Blaze the king of hell. He had basically taken over following the defeat of Mephisto. Mephisto was quite literally locked away in a cell in Las Vegas because the idea of Mephisto was to invade Earth, set up basically its base of operations in Las Vegas, which seems to make the most sense, right? The Devil's Playground is the nickname that it has. And he was ultimately defeated by like Doctor Strange and a handful of others, and then his own hotel was turned into a prison. That left hell vacant, and basically Johnny Blaze took it over. Now, of course, in more recent years, you actually saw a kind of return to form where basically Mephisto got his throne back, and then we didn't really know what happened to Johnny Blaze. But that's where we pick up here. The Johnny Blaze is back on Earth. But the funny thing about this is that he's literally meeting with his therapist. Now, this is when I say that Benjamin Percy is borrowing very, very heavily from Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's The Century, because the stories are almost identical in terms of like how Johnny Blaze is coming back. That what happens, of course, you have Johnny Blaze talking to his therapist, and what he keeps talking about here is how he feels like he sees things that aren't there, right? He sees things that couldn't possibly be happening. In a lot of ways, it's toying with this idea that he has schizophrenia. And one of the things that he does in order to kind of quell his mind and to be able to fall asleep and keep himself from just seeing these horrific visions is that he drinks alcohol, right? He literally drinks himself into a stupor. He says, when I drink myself to sleep, my brain goes black like a midnight highway. I'm nowhere. I'm just gone, hurtling through the great big nothing until dawn comes. And he says, when I don't drink myself to sleep, the nightmares find me. I scream myself awake. I sweat through the sheets. I swing at shadows. I'm not safe to be around. So most nights, I drink. If you fill up a bike with gas, you see more and travel further. But if you fill up a brain with whiskey, every drip empties you further, so that when your eyelids drop, you see nothing, go nowhere. That's where I'm happiest, absolutely nowhere. Now, this is why I say that Benjamin Percy is borrowing from really like the Century storyline. The idea behind the Century when he originally popped up in Marvel Comics is he was basically struggling with schizophrenia. He had these visions and even these memories of when he was a superhero, but in his conversations with his wife, she would always remind him like, you're not a superhero and you never were. You're just a guy. You're Robert Reynolds. You work at a fast food joint. That's all you really do. Like, that's how your life is. You struggle and so on, but literally like Robert Reynolds would have visions where he would see things that weren't there. It was a pretty awesome depiction, or pretty accurate depiction rather, of what schizophrenia is like as I understand it. Now, of course, it turned out to be that Robert Reynolds really was a superhero and that he had actually had a device constructed that would block the world's mind of his existence, because so long as the world knew that Robert Reynolds was the Century, the void would inevitably return because they were both the same person. But the thing about this is that with Johnny Blaze, much like what Robert Reynolds would do, he drinks himself into a stupor. It blocks out all these thoughts and all these memories and everything that he sees, because the reality is he doesn't know if what he's seeing is real or if what he's seeing is false. And the most terrifying thing here, and to really compound on this, he doesn't know what's scarier. The fact that what he's seeing may not be real, or the fact that what he's seeing might be real, right? That it actually is real. And that's really what terrifies him. So one of the things he talks to his therapist about is that he was riding his motorcycle and at one point crashed and basically ended up, getting a massive gouge in the side of his head that just kind of, results in like a scar of sorts. But one of the things that he talks about is like when he walks around, like when he goes out and he does things, he sees the dog that like screams and yaps at him, and the dog like just kind of turns into a demon of sorts. He sees like these crows and things like that that seem to indicate like a dark presence and so on. One of the cops, or at least the local officer, rolls up on him and asks him like, do you know what happened to that dog, like to pimp him? Because Miss Gunderson, or Mrs. Gunderson, went out to her mailbox and found the thing's neck snapped and stuffed into a mailbox. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Johnny? And he's like, no. Like, he makes his way through like the pharmacy and he looks through one of those reflective mirrors, right? Those circular mirrors that they have in there to make sure that you're not stealing anything. And he sees like shadows out in the corner. He checks around the corner. There's nothing there. There's just a little kid. It's things like that, right? It's amazing the way that this is handled, because it really does ask the question, is Johnny Blaze he's actually GhostRider? Like in the story, is he really GhostRider anymore? Or is it him just kind of seeing shadows and so on? Now, if you're familiar with the GhostRider mythos, you basically know what's going on. But in terms of anybody who's never read GhostRider once in their life, it's a phenomenal way to get into the comic. And so what we end up doing is basically jumping to the FBI, and we pick up with a guy who basically, really his name's Agent Wilmer, but he leads what is effectively the paranormal unit of the FBI itself. Now, one of the things to know in Marvel Comics is that by and large, when it came to like paranormal activity and different things along those lines, the government didn't really have a major presence in that, right? Ever since like the old Project Wide Awake stories by Chris Claremont, the main focus of the government by way of S.H.I.E.L.D. and different organizations like that, the Commission on Superhuman Activities and even just the government itself, like law enforcement and so on, it was really more often than not focused on superpowered beings and mutants. That was it. The magical side and the demonic side of Marvel, that was all handled by like Doctor Strange and Brother Voodoo and all these different guys, right? And so what you have here is literally a kind of paranormal unit of the FBI that basically operates on a shoestring budget, which is to say it's like a one-man operation. It's basically Agent Wilmer, and like that's really it. The only other person that's involved in this is a girl who's actually being introduced in this comic for the very first time, named Talia Warroad, and like that's it. We don't really know a whole lot about her. The only thing we know is that she basically comes from what seems to be the paranormal unit of S.H.I.E.L.D. or was involved in S.H.I.E.L.D. in some capacity. We'll learn more about her as time goes on if we end up covering the rest of Benjamin Percy's GhostRider, but it's cool because again, it really just kind of gives us this idea that like the paranormal unit's there, and it is in a lot of ways kind of a license to do whatever she wants. But truth to tell, like a brunt of the federal government's resources, and really as far as the FBI is concerned, are just focused on other things, right? And so it's kind of cool because one of the things she establishes is that she hunts monsters. Now, truth to tell, and as I was reading through this, my initial thought is like, okay, this was kind of a missed opportunity to bring back Bloodstone, right? Like it would have been cool to see her character make a return. Having said that, I do like the idea that a new character is being introduced here. I think it's cool that Benjamin Percy's going that route. But of course, one of the things that happens is you basically have Johnny Blaze meeting with like his father-in-law, right? And they just kind of had this conversation and they're just talking about things. And it's like, do you imagine what your life would have been like if it had gone a different direction, or if you had never gotten into a crash or anything along those lines and you were just kind of doing your thing? But in the midst of all this, what you end up having is the arrival of a guy who quite literally looks like what's his name from The Stand, right? God, I can never remember the guy's name. He was the character that crossed over everything. He was in like the Gunslinger series, like the Man in Black, right? But he had an actual name in The Stand, and I can never remember his name for the life of me. But he literally looks like him, right? He looks like that guy. And so as he makes his way through this town, this idea of him being almost demonic in nature manifests itself when he's kind of walking by what is basically a kind of backyard baseball game, right? An unofficial baseball game. And this kid like goes to hit the ball, and like the ball gets, it gets knocked into a foul, and it's like strike three, you're out and that kind of thing. And this kid's like, that was a foul, right? Like I barely hit it, so on and so forth. And that this guy picks up the baseball, he hands it to the kid, it has a kind of demonic face on it, and he's like, that kid's a liar, man. Why don't you show him how hard you can hit? And so that kid, seemingly now possessed, runs up on the guy at the pitcher's mound and just starts bludgeoning him with a baseball bat. This is why I say, this is the old GhostRider stuff. This is GhostRider from like back in the 70s and back in the 80s. In more recent years in Marvel Comics, the GhostRider just didn't quite have the same kind of like pizzazz that he had back in the day. And I hate to use that word because it kind of indicates like glitz and glimmer and beauty and all that kind of stuff. But the truth about the old GhostRider stories, man, is Marvel didn't shy away from some really dark storytelling. It was as close as Marvel ever got to like the old Spawn comics, and even the old GhostRider stories themselves. Danny Ketch, Johnny Blaze, those all influenced the Spawn comics of Todd McFarlane. So it's really cool to see that this is kind of a return to form. But this guy's just kind of walking through the town, through like the middle of the street, musing to himself, this is just a perfect little town, right? Just a beautiful little town. But obviously it's not what it seems to be, right? Apple pies and baseball and fireflies and 4th of July parades and Sunday sermons. But somebody's screwing somebody they shouldn't. Somebody's stealing money from the register. Somebody's got a body buried beneath their rose garden. The entire depiction of this town is a lie, right? This town is not what it appears to be. And so that's when you switch over to Johnny Blaze meeting with his therapist again. And this is really when Benjamin Percy goes in with the idea that Johnny Blaze just might be crazy. Because as he's having this conversation with his therapist, and as she's asking questions like, how are things going with Roxanne? What's your favorite position, Johnny? Like, how do you like to sleep with your wife? Just these really, really personal questions that while a therapist may ask those, they wouldn't ask those so bluntly, right? And most therapists would probably only ask those questions in relation to like how you view yourself and the life that you have, and maybe to an extent your relationship. But he talks about like, she says she's terrified of what'll happen if I ride the bike again. Doesn't seem like I ride the bike around, different things like that, that his wife is concerned about him, right? And they seem very much in love. Their life really just seems to be perfect, right? But as he's having this conversation with his therapist, suddenly like the picture behind him, like it literally turns into a hog on a spit roast. And as the picture's changing, a wolf comes out of nowhere. A wolf starts to eat the hog. He turns around and looks at his therapist as he sees the picture's weird. His therapist has like this crazy demonic appearance. He goes to attack his therapist only for him to snap out of it and realize like it's just her sitting in this room, that nothing is abnormal and nothing strange, right? What's wrong with me? And so as he makes his way through the town, and you've literally just got like all these crazy depictions of people just being ripped apart, and you've got stuff on fire, and it literally looks like a hellish landscape, Johnny Blaze keeps telling himself, there's no such thing as monsters. My mind's running away with me. This is all insanity or something like that. He gets in his house, his wife and his kids look all demonic and everything, and it's just like none of this is right. You know, none of this seems to be correct, but there's no such thing as monsters. There's no such thing as monsters. And so she asked him, like, have you taken your pills? And that again draws on the element of like Robert Reynolds. That Robert Reynolds was basically a guy who is on anti-schizophrenic medication, if I remember correctly. Not gonna swear to that, but literally she's like, are you off your meds? Because like everything that you're just spouting out here seems to be nonsense. Like this all seems to be crazy. But that's when he starts to challenge his wife, and he's like, I don't remember giving you that ring. How did you get that ring? I don't remember proposing to you. I don't remember anything that leads up to this life we had. I don't remember it. I don't remember meeting you. I don't remember asking you to marry me. I don't remember us dating. I don't even remember us having kids. I don't remember any of these things. I just remember being here one day. So what's going on? Now, of course, like while his wife is terrified, scared out of her wits, draws a knife in order to keep herself protected from her husband, Zeb pops up. And she's like, who in the world are you? And he's like, my name's Zeb. Here's my card, right? Like gives her this card and says, isn't that a lovely ring? Mind asking me what it's made of? And so literally while this guy's standing outside the house, then of course Johnny Blaze steps in to try to protect his wife. And so like literally Zeb pops up and he was like, I hate to break it to you, man, but that's not your wife and this is not your town. He says, I hate to be the one to bear bad news here, man, but nothing that you believe that's going on here is actually accurate. And so when Johnny asks, who are you? This guy's response is, I'm a scout. I was sent by a group of night magicians to find you. And where Johnny's like, that's a lie, this guy's like, no, you're the one living the lie, man. None of this is real. And that's when he's suddenly hit by a car. And then he reaches his hand out and says, take my hand, Johnny. Let me show you what's actually going on. Let me show you who you truly are. And when Johnny takes this guy's hand, that's literally when he gets this vision of what the world looks like. That in the absence of the GhostRider, meaning that there's no one riding around there with the spirit of vengeance punishing the wicked, it's quite literally in a lot of ways hell on earth. Now it's hell on earth in a metaphysical form, which is to say the earth has not been conquered by demons and that this is all just some ruse. So when Johnny gets out there, it's gonna be the Avengers are all just these satanic spawn and all that kind of stuff. It's nothing like that. Remember, demons for the most part in the Marvel universe operate behind the scenes. They possess people, they take people over, but they commit all kinds of crazy and insane acts. But Johnny's the one who's supposed to keep the world protected from that. And that's why Zeb tells him, we need you, or rather, we need what's inside you. We need the spirit of vengeance. And so literally what happens is he says, come back to us if the spirit moves you, and then ultimately takes off, right? Like Zeb just turns into a crow and flies away. And that's when the town turns to Johnny and says, don't listen to that guy, Johnny. Everything will be okay. We'll take care of you, right? Come back to us, Johnny. We love you. We need you. And so literally Johnny Blaze in that moment slashes the ring off of his wife's hand, right? Literally like cuts her fingers off her hand. The ring comes off. She immediately transforms back into a demonic form. And then Johnny picks the ring up and he puts it on and it's like, boom, right? Like the spirit of vengeance reemerges because what they done is they had taken the spirit of vengeance and confined it inside of a ring, quite literally put it in a cage. And so like literally in that moment, we get like one of the best GhostRider monologues ever because Johnny says, when that hellstrom of fire descends on me, I realize I'm about to trade one prison for another. When he takes me over, my whole body feels like a flaming nest buzzing with hot, angry wasps, and I shrink down to a black speck at the center. And so that's when the GhostRider, like the spirit of vengeance, fully takes over. And when he emerges, he is pissed. This guy is incensed, right? Like literally GhostRider is more pissed off than he's ever been. And he's like, who did this? Who caged me here in this town? And literally like, they're like, no, like don't leave us. Like Johnny, you have to stay. And his response is, Johnny's gone. There's no Johnny Blaze now. There's only GhostRider. And like literally they jump in to try to like strip the GhostRider off of Johnny Blaze. And it's crazy, right? Because he's like, who did this, right? Because they're spouting things out like it doesn't matter what you do to us. If we do not keep you here, it will never be worth worse than what he will do, right? So just like referencing some enigmatic force out there. And the response to Johnny is constantly the same. Who did this, right? Like, who's he? Who are you talking about? But at the end of the day, it doesn't make any difference, because woe betide the poor bastard that runs up on GhostRider and decides to start causing problems, right? Here's the thing, like, it's nuts, because they thought they had him defeated, right? That's the thing to understand. They thought they had the GhostRider locked down, right? It's like that guy said to John Lithgow in that movie Ricochet, you didn't beat him, you just pissed him off, and now you because now he's gonna be out for blood. And that's exactly what it is, right? Like, literally, he just like grabbed like the flaming chain and takes he helps these guys understand their place in the bigger picture. You understand what I'm saying? Like, he helps them finish with all their living and condemns them all back to hell. And so at that moment, he says, I can't control what I've become. I can only observe it all distantly, like a horror film seen through a telescope. Maybe a cluster of demons broke my brain and spirit, trapping me in a sunlit prison. And maybe a dark magician broke me out. Or maybe this is all just one more hallucination. Maybe any second now, I'm gonna wake up screaming. Or maybe a semi just clipped me and this whole head trip is one long skin-melting skid across the asphalt before everything goes dark. The only thing that feels certain is this: there is such a thing as monsters, and as the GhostRider, I'm the worst one of all. So let me know if you guys want me to cover the rest of this, because it only gets better, right? That's why I tell you guys, man, Benjamin Percy's GhostRider is, oh my God, it's amazing. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.